Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and today I'm going to be reviewing Trailblazers. This is a little puzzle game designed by Ryan Courtney and published by Bitewing Games. This is a review copy that they sent me, so keep that in mind throughout the review. Alright, so here's everything I need to do a review of Trailblazers. There's not a whole lot of setup. You just separate some cards out and off you go. This is an expansion we're going to talk about in a little bit. But as you can see, Trailblazers is a very simple game to teach and learn. It's very hard to do well at, however, which we'll get to. But here's the solo rulebook. It's just this little tiny thing. And that's really all you need to know, which is kind of amazing. But I had this thing up and running in minutes, and so will you. As for winning, though, not so much. At least not for me, unless maybe you have the brain for this game. But it is fun. So this is a little puzzler. This is like the little solo achievement card that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But basically the premise of Trailblazers in both solo and multiplayer is that you have these 3 different types of camps. And you have some different cards that have trails that are color-coded to your camp types. And you're going to try to build trails that loop around, starting at the correct camp type and then also ending there. So like this card, for example, has a blue kayaking trail, a creek. This is a hiking trail, and then here's a biking trail. And you can see that they have different colors and patterns so that you're able to recognize which kind of trail is which. So in each of the first 3 rounds of the game, you're basically going to choose which of these camps you're going to put down first. And you can do that based on your endgame goals that show up and on the cards that you have offered to you. So, for example, let's just start as if we're going to play around, and I will talk you through it. So, your first hand is going to have 8 cards in it, 8 of these little cards. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then in solo, you basically can use this to determine which goals you want to go for. So Tenderfoot, you're just trying to build trails that are certain lengths, and we'll talk about how that works. In Voyager, you just have one goal you're trying to meet by a certain point in the game, and it's graded by difficulty. And then in Blazer, you have to do 2 goals. One that's an in-game goal that you have to complete by round 3, or else you lose before you even finish the game. And one that's an end-game goal that you have to complete in order to even score your game. But let's just say that we were going to be playing on this Blazer difficulty mode, which I'm personally not really great at yet. But basically, we would have an in-game goal and an end-game goal. So our in-game goal would be Hiker's Quartet, which means that by the end of round 3, start of round 4, I need 4 hiking loops. And then the end-game goal, which fortunately would coincide with this nicely, is the most total length on hiking loops. And there's like a little head here that tells me I need to get 35 as my goal score for that endgame goal for it to count. So in multiplayer, you just get points for whoever manages to do it first, second, and third. In solo, you have to do it, and it's like a personal challenge to do so. The other thing I'm going to look at is, of course, my cards. So let's see what we've got here. All right, so this is the start of a round. I'm going to look at everything I have available to me. So I know my goals, I have my first hand of cards, and I'm going to choose a camp to put down. I think that because I'm going to have to work so much on hiking in this particular game, this is definitely the first camp that's going to go. And then these 2 are going to be placed at the beginnings of rounds 2 and 3 after I look at my initial draft. Then I'm going to get to pick 2 cards from this set. They're going to try to get me towards these goals. So if I want a whole bunch of loops, maybe I want to take a couple of really easy loops. So I could do something as basic as this and say, oh, boom, that's my first hiking loop, ha ha ha, and then I can just try to make other loops as we go. Or I can do something ambitious, and I can decide that I want to get started on a larger loop, or maybe because I can have 2 loops started, I could do something like this, and then maybe I want to do something like this, where I have one that's already kind of headed back, and then one that can loop around a bit more. But once I've placed those 2 cards, in multiplayer you're drafting, so you take 2 cards and you pass your hand to the person next to you. In solo, all these cards that I didn't pick get discarded from the game. So these go away. And then I would draw 6 cards, because that's what I would receive from my neighbor in a multiplayer. And I do the same thing again. So I'm going to pick 2 of these cards. I'm going to place them. I'm going to discard the remainder. Then I'll draw 4, pick 2, and then the round is over and it's time to place another camp. So this is actually a pretty nice hand for what I was working on, except that I can only take 2 of them and they're all hiking trails. So I can work a lot on my hiking goals. But then at the beginning of the next round, I'm going to have to place another one of these camps. And so whatever I was working on, I'm going to have another thing in my life to work on and very limited time to do it. And on top of that, there are several little scoring complexities to the game that make it even more intense. So as for placement, you might have noticed I'm placing things orthogonally. You can overlap your cards, but they all have to be orthogonally adjacent, horizontal or vertical. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't just do weird stuff off in the distance. So you do have to be mindful about how you're trying to place your cards. Scoring is interesting because basically you score by features. So right now, each of these 2 hiking trails is a potential for 2 points, 1, 2, 1, 2, because of the features that are on the trails. However, I'm not going to score anything for a trail that doesn't loop all the way back to its originating base camp. So if I have this hiking trail with all these amazing features and it's looking really good, but I never managed to complete the loop back to my hiking camp, then I don't get any of the points. So I'm trying to get certain amounts of points. I need 4 hiking loops. I need 35 features on hiking loops in order to make that work. That's a lot of points. To win the solo game at all, you need to get 50 points total. And so there's a whole bunch of different stuff that you have to think about. And you have these very limited cards and you have these very intense timers that you have to work with in order to make it happen. So this game is super tough, and they know that, which is why you get this particular description of how you should do solo. So here we have this really nice card. Basically, you want to start with Tenderfoot and see if you can get loop length points off of all 3 of your camps. So, if you hit 30 points, you're ready to start for trying for 40. If you hit 40, you're ready to start trying for 50. And then once you can consistently hit 50 points, then you want to move on and start adding the goals in. So for Voyager, you're going to add either an in-game or end-game goal. And you just have to score it by the right point in the game. So an in-game goal is scored at the beginning of round 4, basically once you've placed all of your camps, and there's that one more round. At the beginning of that round, you see if you've reached the goal. An end game goal is one that you, of course, have to reach by the end of the game, which is the end of round 4. And then if you're playing the Blazer level, you have both an in-game and an end-game scoring component to deal with. So this is a lot to work through. I'm somewhere in the Voyager range right now. That's what I'll say. I'm not good at this game. But then there's a whole bunch more goal combinations that get harder and harder all the way up to the end. So there's plenty to entertain you with this if you want to work at figuring out how to do different kinds of goals and you want to get really into the intricacies of the game. There's also this little expansion. And this is an animal expansion. In the full-size box, it's actually meeples, but it's just tokens to fit in the little clamshell. But these are used in multiplayer. There's also a solo mode called Epic Solo Mode where you score only off of animals. So basically, when you place cards along your main trail that have an animal, you can place a corresponding token to show that, oh, there's an animal sighting, and you're trying to get points based on placing segments of your trail that have different animals on them. But again, they still have to loop back around or else. So that is a very quick and dirty overview of Trailblazers. It's a card laying game. You're trying to lay out cards that have these segments of trail. You want to start at a camp of the right color and then loop around so that the trail is complete. And ultimately, throughout the game, you're going to have to do that for different types of campsite. And you're going to have to manage all those different trails all at the same time. So, if I had put this here, at least I would have one trail, but I would probably want more. Meanwhile, you've got these in and end game goals to deal with, and a brutal draft where you only get 2 cards at a time, and you just really don't know when what you need is going to come up, or maybe you'll get an embarrassment of riches and have to discard a bunch of them. So that's the game. Let's have some final thoughts. All right, so now for some final thoughts, and once again, be reminded these are final thoughts about a review copy. So what do I think of Trailblazers? Well, I think it's good. It's probably not like a permanent addictive keeper for me. And I've been spending some time thinking about why that is. So I do like the game, and I really like that it kind of knows who it's for and what size it should be. Like, there's a full-size box, but actually I really like this little travel clamshell because this is the kind of game that is short, it's quick. You pull it out of your backpack when you're waiting at a restaurant. You pull it out of your backpack when you have a minute at your desk, when you just need to kill some time, either alone or with up to 3 friends, and you suddenly have some fun that can be transportable. So I actually really like that Trailblazers accommodates for that, at least in one of its forms. I think it might actually have too many different types of published forms. I really kind of think that just the clamshell would have been good, actually. But, I think that it is aware of its size. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's very quick. It gets a lot done in the short time that you have it out. And I feel like it's very well paced. And so, the pacing of like, oh, I have to put down a camp, and oh Lord, I'm going to spend this round trying to figure out what to do with it. I'm going to put down another camp. Oh, I was thinking about the first one the whole time. I didn't make enough plans for this. And then by the third one, you're like, oh, how am I ever going to do this? And you spend the entire 4th round like freaking out and trying to like place things. And so I think the pacing's really good. I think that the timing of the game is really good. I think that the presentation of the game is really good. And I do think that the puzzling itself is mostly fun. So the real challenge here is that because you're drafting, you have to figure out, like, okay, which of these 2 cards do I need the most, and which are the smartest to put down right now. So I'm going to take a longer piece of trail and hope that I score high. I'm going to take a shorter piece and finish my goal, but maybe I didn't get the best score I could have gotten. What are my focus areas right now? What colors of trail am I looking for? And what am I, how am I going to prioritize? And so the game really forces these tough choices. And I always like tough choices at a game. I think that Trailblazers does a really, really good job of making you feel that pressure of time's ticking. I can only take so many of these cards, like, oh, crap, what do I do? Like, it really creates that tension. At the same time, I'm not totally convinced the puzzle is meaningful and rewards as much mastery as I would like. And again, I do want to point out, like, I really like that it has, especially for solo, like that series of challenges. The solo game is very unforgiving, and you really have to keep hitting these higher and higher targets, and it's going to work you through all the different goals of the game. There are a whole bunch of different configurations that you can try to win with, and I think that that's overall really great. At the same time, especially as the game accelerates in difficulty, because you're drafting, I kind of feel like when you're trying to make the game about being really smart, the fact that you're still essentially gambling about what trail parts are going to come up makes the puzzle less satisfying. And, I think to something like Sprawlopolis, where you're holding cards in your hand and you're picking which one to play, but eventually they all get played, I prefer that way of puzzling out something like this, because then I feel like when I don't do well in Sprawlopolis, it's my fault. When I don't do well in Trailblazers, I'm not convinced that it's my fault. And I think for a puzzle game where you're supposed to be kind of thinking and feeling thinky, there's something about that doesn't quite satisfy me. And I think that the most natural comparison for Trailblazers is something like Sprawlopolis, because again, you're laying trails, you're trying to make loops, you're trying to connect different types of trail, versus Sprawlopolis' different types of neighborhood. And so those games compare really naturally, especially because Sprawlopolis is one of my favorites. This one is not at that level for me. I think that Trailblazers is good. I think it's enjoyable, but I don't think, oh man, I've got to put Trailblazers in my backpack, and I just must play it again. Even though it's perfectly suited for that, I don't find myself wanting to pull Trailblazers out at lunch at work. And I think that it is because, despite the beautiful presentation and despite the delicious nastiness of the game itself, I just don't actually enjoy doing the puzzle, because I don't feel like there's a right balance between what I feel capable of and then what the game gives me. And I'm sure there are people who feel very differently. It may just be that my brain isn't great for Trailblazers and I want something to blame, but the game gave me the room to do that. And so that's how I feel. I will say that I really appreciate all the different game modes. I like that the animals expansion comes in there with its little tokens. In solo, there's always a real relief when there's a game that gives you a whole bunch of different kinds of challenges to try out. So this may really perfectly suit you and you may love it. But for me, this felt too much like gambling and not enough like puzzling. I never felt clever enough when I did something right. And I never felt like it was my fault when I did something wrong. And so that's where I come down on this one. It's decent. I think that if you really love puzzlers and you love the theme, that you'll probably enjoy giving it a try. But for me, it's not a permanent keeper. So that's Trailblazers. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and most of all, happy gaming.